Today I want to talk to you about this new book called Reforming Criminal Justice by Matthew Martens, put out by Crossway, which I just finished, and I want to say thanks to Crossway for sending me a copy for review. This is my honest reaction to this book. This is a hefty one, so let's get into my typical format of the main idea of the book, the research behind it, the readability of its style, and then my general zoomed out kind of reaction to the whole thing. So Reforming Criminal Justice, I was not familiar with Matthew Martens at all, and that's because he hasn't really written any other books in any of the streams that I read. He, it turns out, is a very experienced attorney litigator, and this is kind of his. I gather this is kind of his a project he wrote at the behest of some people who knew him because they felt like he would have a lot of wisdom and experience to draw on to speak into our criminal justice system. Interestingly, something interesting about him is he has all this experience in law and in the system of courts and criminal justice and so on and so forth. But he also actually went to seminary and got theologically educated and theologically trained as well. So he's kind of trying to bring those two streams together. It seems like he was encouraged to write this book at the behest of some mentors and friends. And so I really just was interested in it because of the framework of it, the proposal of it. I did not bring any sort of name recognition into it. Okay. The main idea of this book is kind of in two parts. The first half of the book is a zoomed out kind of look at a kind of a biblical theological understanding of what a fair and just criminal justice system, what kind of principles a criminal justice system should operate upon, based in biblical text, biblical narrative, and some theological work. So the first half is a little bit more of that kind of abstract, systematized kind of presentation of in his argument, here are principles like accountability, like due process, that a system should work on, in an ideal kind of sense. Kind of in an ideal sense. I'll say more about that in my reaction, but that's the first half of the book is that theological project, biblical project of what a criminal justice system could look like. The second half, or maybe it's actually a little bit more than half, are chapters on, and I liked this half actually better overall. Again, I'll say more in my reaction, but this is he takes certain slices of the criminal justice system and then evaluates the history of them. He brings his perspective on it. Here's what's wrong about something like jury selection or the process of exculpatory evidence is another chapter. And he takes the death penalty is another one. He takes a bunch of kind of facets of the criminal justice system as it stands in America right now, and then brings history into that, evaluates what's, in most cases, what's not working well about them, and then gives some suggestions for how they could be fixed or adjusted or whatever. So that's kind of the two legs of the book. Extremely carefully written and informative, but I'll get more into that in a minute. So there's the zoomed out presentation of a whole system, and then there's an analysis of specific aspects of our system as it stands. Okay, that's the main idea. This is a pretty hefty one, so I'm going to try to march through this a little bit quicker now. The research behind it is really, really careful and good and solid. Those two halves of the book bring different research to bear on them. The first half is a little bit more, like I said, broader. He pulls on a little bit more of general theological work, like Augustine, or like especially Reinhold Niebuhr is a voice in that section. A lot of biblical citations. He does go through the biblical account pretty extensively. The second half is much more citing. I mean, he cites current case studies or current actual case decisions, Supreme Court decisions, etc. He does cite that all throughout the book, but the second, by the nature of what he's doing in the second half of the book with these analysis of specific aspects of the system, he gets a lot more into examples, like anecdotes and examples of legal decisions that have been made in certain courts and how that plays out on a practical level. Also, I was pleasantly surprised to see a lot of historical research in that. There's actually one whole chapter that's just on the history of criminal justice in America, and there's a lot of historical research, and a lot of it has to do with the history of race and the racialization of certain policies, and so he brings a lot of that to bear, kind of an historical view in that second half, and that was really good. So that's a little bit of what kind of he's drawing on, lots of legal expertise and legal experience and data that he has, and then also bringing in biblical and theological resources. So again, it's a big project. Okay, the readability of it is you're probably wondering if you're reading this, like, okay, is this thing just like super dry? Is this like super, I don't know, is this like reading legal briefs? It's not. I found it quite readable in a very straightforward kind of way. It's not flowery at all. It's it's very straightforward, very matter of fact, very clear analysis. It's very lucid. It's very accessible in that way. It's not. He's not trying to grip you with passionate and impassioned argumentation per se. It's actually, if anything, very very analytical, very measured, but very straightforward. And it's not. I mean, I actually find that the anecdotal stuff of like bringing in cases and like he presents actually a lot of stories, mini stories of cases, things that have happened in different states and different times in history, and those are really actually quite interesting and quite engaging. But it is a very straightforward, matter-of-fact style of approach. It's a little long. It is a little on the long side, but I would not say it. I mean, if you're interested in this topic, if you're passionate about this topic, I think you're probably going to really appreciate his cool and calm and convicted kind of measured march through all these topics. But it's not, like I said, an impassioned and rousing, style. So very, very readable, very appropriate to what he's trying to do. Okay, now my reaction to this book. First thing I want to say is I really appreciated this book. I'm keeping it. I will very likely be referencing it in the future. And I found it extraordinarily helpful. It's a very... I am a novice when it comes to legal. I have no legal education. I did take one business law class in college, but I mean, that was ages ago. And so I'm just a layperson, so to speak, and interested in the topic. And so in some ways, I'm a perfect kind of representation of who this book might be written towards. And I found it remarkably helpful. I found it, from what I can tell, pretty comprehensive, like the things that he overviews, the different aspects of the system that he goes into. It felt very comprehensive to me. There were things that I learned a ton, especially in that second half. I learned so much. One example that's coming to mind is like how the system of bail and how people can secure funding for bail works or doesn't work and is very corrupted in certain ways and is deeply unfair to certain segments of our society, namely the poor especially. How he exposes so many loopholes that people have found in different, whether it's like trying juveniles or just all kinds of really kind of infuriating examples of unjust manipulation of our current system as it stands. So I learned just a ton. And that second half especially, I've really found pretty remarkable, and it's pretty remarkable that it's all collected and compiled into one volume like this. Now, you might be able to tell I'm holding back a critique. I don't even know. I don't know if this is a critique or not. I'm just going to put my perspective out there. If you're watching this, maybe this will help you. You might resonate with it or not. I'm not sure. But he's quite a... He's coming from a particular, especially in that first half, he's coming from a particular theological stream. It seems to be very influenced by the Niebuhrian, Reinhold Niebuhr, Christian realist kind of take. Namely that, sin is unavoidable, sin is inescapable, it's universal. There's kind of a Protestant Calvinistic influence here. Sin is, pervasive, permeates kind of everything, including the systems we build, and so we should kind of almost assume that there's going to be sin built into any sort of justice system that we build, and so we should understand that should kind of temper our ideals for how much justice can even be realized. And I agree with a lot of that on paper. I am just not. I'm a little bit more personally, theologically, and especially political theology. I'm drawn a bit more towards more of an Anabaptist kind of bent and a lot of premises than the Christian realist Niebuhr kind of perspective. So I found myself not quite resonating with some of the framework that he used. So take that for what it's worth. He's coming from a particular lens, a particular stream, particular tradition, and you may or may not. Your mileage is going to vary with that. That said, I found this style very, very helpful, very nuanced, very balanced. As a representative of that Christian realist kind of approach, I think it's solid and good. I'm just not sure I'm quite there with him on all things. But I will say in that first half especially, he does I really appreciated his theme that he kept looping back to, which is that what is a criminal justice system that furthers love look like? What does it look like to love the punished? What does it look like to love the punished, meaning like those who are being kind of punished by the criminal justice system? What does it look like to love people that the system is trying to keep safe? Like, what does it look like to love victims of crime? And how does that kind of play out in our attempt to see some approximation of justice realized in these systems, these law systems that we build and adjudicate in this life, in this society? So I thought that theme of love I found really helpful, even if I, maybe come from a little bit of a different angle on some of the nitty gritty specifics. And I think I found the second half more interesting because of those. I like that specific study approach on particular themes, and I also liked a lot more of the anecdotes and stories that kind of were threaded through that second half. So that's kind of the map and the layout of the book. That's my one critique of that first half. But overall, again, this is a remarkable resource. I am really glad he agreed to write this book. Theological quibbles aside or whatever, I just think that this is a pretty unique and remarkable tool that brings his experiences in law and his training in theology and seminary, brings them together. It's so thoughtful. Last thing I want to say about it is, even though in some ways he's representing quite a you can tell there's kind of a conservative, small c conservative, like a conserving what's good about our system kind of approach. He certainly would. It struck me as much more of a conservative reform proposal than like a progressive reform proposal or revolutionary reform proposal. And he's also conservative in that certain stream of Christian thought that I mentioned. All that being said, I was really happy with, pleased by, challenged by his very honest reckoning with the history of race and racialization in our, especially as it relates to law and public policy in America. Like, he really does not mince any words or pull any punches when it comes to how bad that is in our history. And he brings that to bear in this conversation with full force in a very challenging way. And I think he has a lot of credibility to say that kind of stuff because of his general conservative kind of approach and lots of other things. So I think I'm saying all that to say that, like, this is probably a really good book for someone who's really wrestling with the narratives that you're hearing and policy proposals that you're hearing, and especially the way that the race conversation is so charged and so fraught right now. I think this is a really good example of having like a thoughtful, informed, experienced, wise, but small c conservative voice in that whole debate. So yeah, a lot to say about this book. Again, it's a hefty project. It took me a while to work through, but it's really wonderful. It's a wonderful book. Again, like I said, what I'm going to keep, what I'm going to reference. I'm going to pull down that second half, especially, and go into those chapters when I'm kind of trying to remember a specific way that a certain law or legal policy works. A really, really great book and a great kind of tool, all those things considered. So those are my thoughts on Reforming Criminal Justice from Crossway and Matthew Martens. Hopefully that was helpful to you as you're wrestling with whether or not this might be a book that you would want to look up and spend some time with. Thanks always for taking some time to watch.